ever get that feeling? Like you're drowning in financial news. Headlines everywhere you look, but still feeling kind of clueless.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like drinking from a fire hose. Right. Information overload, but not really understanding what's going on.
Exactly. That's the whole point of the deep dive,
Yeah.
you know? We wade through it all. Research, articles, even those like deep dives you see on YouTube.
Trying to cut through the noise and find what really matters, give you a shortcut, basically.
Exactly. And today, well, we've been digging into this fascinating Connect the Dots series by Rantz over on YouTube.
You seen those? He does a great job tracing those hidden links between, well, everyone really. People, companies, especially private equity firms. You wouldn't believe how much influence they have.
Yeah, that was a real eye-opener for us, too. Like, you see private equity popping up everywhere.
Right. We've been looking at his transcripts and our own notes, too, and it just kept coming up. Private equity.
So today's deep dive is going to be a little different. All right, we're not just going to list out companies or rehash headlines. We're going to try to actually connect those dots ourselves.
Like a Joe Rogan podcast with Matt Taibbi and Martin Lewis. Yeah. Getting to the bottom of things.
Exactly. So let's unravel this web, starting with this connect the dots idea. What's it all about?
Well, it's like this. Rantz's Connect the Dots is about looking beyond the surface.
Okay.
It's about tracing the relationships between all the players in finance, the people, the companies, investment banks.
Especially those private equity firms.
Especially those. He wants to uncover those hidden connections, those conflicts of interest that might explain why the market does what it does or why certain companies end up the way they do.
Fascinating stuff. So it's not just random events happening. It's like this network of
interconnected interests. Exactly.
Okay, so we got to look beyond the press releases, the headlines, see who's really pulling the strings right.
Right.
And one of those early connections, that really pops up when you start looking at these webs.
Yeah.
Is this firm Drexel Burnham Lambert?
Oh, yeah, Drexel Burnham Lambert. They're a huge part of this story. They were dominant back in the 70s and 80s.
What did they do?
They really fueled that whole leveraged buyout craze. Using junk bonds, they were controversial, to say the least. Marantz even compares them to, well, let's just say, a certain organized crime group.
Wow.
Yeah. And ultimately, that whole junk bond market led to their downfall. They went bankrupt.
So they're gone, but their influence lives on.
Exactly. The people who work there, they went on to big things, important positions at other financial institutions.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It is. And that's where the connections start to get really interesting. Take Leon Black, for example. He was a key player at Drexel. And guess what? He went on to co-found Apollo Management with a major private equity firm, one of the biggest.
So those old connections really do matter.
Oh, they matter. They can have a ripple effect for decades.
Okay, so let's talk about those private equity firms. How do they operate? What should people be watching out for?
Well, one thing Marantz talks about that's a little concerning is this idea that private equity firms might be planting their own people in publicly traded companies.
Hold on. Planting their own people?
Yeah, it's a strategy, potentially, to kind of steer the company in a certain direction, maybe even make it decline on purpose.
Why would they do that?
So they could swoop in later and buy it up cheap, or restructure in a way that benefits them. It raises some questions about who they're really working for.
Oh, that sounds a little manipulative.
Yeah. And then there's the LBO, leveraged buyout. It's a classic private equity play. They use borrowed money to buy a company, which saddles the company with a ton of debt.
Right.
We saw this almost happen with Kohl's. They were targeted by activist investors looking to do an LBO. The problem is all that debt makes company really vulnerable. And private equity guys, they're all about those short-term gains. They might not care about the long-term health of the business.
It's all about making a quick buck.
Pretty much.
Okay, so that's the playbook. Let's look at some real-world examples. What about AMC Entertainment? That was a wild ride.
AMC, the meme stock darling, right?
Right.
But even before all that craziness, they were showing some of those classic signs Rantz talks about, those PE-style distress signals.
What are those?
Huge debt, chronic losses. They even had to write down the value of their assets. Remember when they almost went bankrupt during the pandemic?
Yeah.
Well, they only survived because they raised a ton of emergency capital, which left them in a very precarious position.
I'm sensing a theme here. And did private equity have a hand in that?
They did. Back in 2018, Silver Lake, a private equity firm, invested $600 million in AMC. Through a convertible note, that gave them a seat on the board and a lot of influence. They eventually cashed out during the meme stock surge, but that initial involvement just added to AMC's debt.
I see.
And here's another connection. AMC's current CEO, Adam Aron, he's got a private equity background. He was a partner at Apollo Global. So you see these companies often bring in leaders with that restructuring experience, the financial engineering types.
The connections are getting clearer now. Okay, so what about GameStop? That was another meme stock. But it seems like their story went in a different direction.
GameStop. Now, that's an interesting one. Yeah, it had that meme stock volatility, but it did take a different path. Now, Rantz mentions that GameStop was partnered up with KKR on the board. And it's usually pretty critical of private equity involvement, so this raised some flags for him. He even suggested GameStop could get gutted from the inside out.
But that didn't really happen, did it? Ryan Cohen stepped in, right?
He did. And Marantz actually says that when they turned off the buy button for a bunch of meme stocks back in 2021, GameStop was the exception. And he credits Ryan Cohen for steering GameStop away from that potential disaster. And if you look at their financials now, it's a whole new company. Revenue is down, but gross profits are actually up. They're streamlining, cutting the fat.
And what about that 401k match thing? A lot of people saw that as a bad sign.
Well, some people did, but it might not be as bad as it looks. Larry Cheng, he's pretty bullish on the gaming market, and Ryan Cohen's vision for GameStop. He thinks it could be a smart move long-term, improve their financial health. Sometimes you got to make tough choices.
So GameStop might have dodged a bullet there, thanks to Ryan Cohen. Okay, so let's switch gears. Bed Bath & Beyond. That was a pretty clear decline.
Yeah, Bed Bath & Beyond. Straightforward bankruptcy. But here's an interesting twist. Overstock.com bought their brand, some of their intellectual property, and then they rebranded as Beyond Inc. There's this guy, Anand Patel, involved with Beyond Overstock. He's been promoting the brand like crazy.
So they're trying to revive it. And are there private equity connections here too?
Oh, there always are. Look at Lisa Kellinger. She's the chairman of the board for the Container Store, and they're partnering with Beyond. But here's the thing. She's got a long history with companies that have had a lot of investment from Apollo, Limited Brands, Michaels, even Fresh Market. Remember Sue Gove? She was there too.
Yeah.
So you see these same people moving around, different companies, but always that private equity connection.
It's like a revolving door. Okay, let's go back to that buy button incident in 2021. Rantz had a theory about that, about why it happened and how it connected to GameStop and those other meme stocks.
Oh yeah, that was crazy. Suddenly they shut off the buy button for a bunch of stocks. NetKD, NOK, SNDL, TRPG. Rantz thinks it was no coincidence. He believes it was because GameStop was going through the roof. And these other companies, a lot of them with private equity ties and heavy short interest, they were starting to rise too. So to prevent a total market meltdown, they had to stop the bleeding, halt trading on those specific stocks.
And what was the key point of his theory?
According to Rantz, private equity was all over those companies whose buy buttons got turned off, except one, GameStop. And that just adds to his whole argument about the power of private equity, their ability to influence the market.
Okay, so moving on. Academy Sports plus Outdoors, ASO. Rantz has flagged that one.
Yeah, he's concerned about ASO, thinks it's being driven a certain way. And when you look at their board members, some of them have ties to companies that went bankrupt. Sears, Belk. So it fits his theory that these private equity guys, they bring in people who have experience with companies that have gone down a certain path.
Interesting. What about Dollar General? They've got a pretty clear private equity history.
Oh, yeah. Dollar General. KKR bought them outright back in 2007, took them public again in 2009. So there's a definite private equity chapter there. And Marantz points out that their former CEO, he had connections to PVH Corp, another private equity-linked company. And he was also a director at AutoZone, which also has private equity ties.
It's everywhere. And Carvana, the online car retailer. They're in the mix too.
Carvana. Yeah, they've got Apollo all over them. Apollo owns like 90% of their bonds. That's a lot of influence, especially if Carvana runs into trouble.
What about ChargePoint, the EV charging company?
ChargePoint. Well, Antera Capital is invested heavily in them. And Marantz points out that Antera was also involved with AMC. He calls it Project Popcorn. And he suggests there's a pattern. Antera invests, then things go south, maybe some short selling involved. He basically says, if you see Antera as a principal investor, run.
Yikes. Okay. Floor and Decor, what about them?
Floor and Decor. Yeah, one of their board members used to work for Linens and Things, another Apollo-connected company. And another board member, Marantz calls him a plant from Aries, another private equity firm. It just keeps happening.
Okay, so we've got to talk about Mullen Automotive. They seem like a poster child for all of this.
Mullen Automotive. Yeah, they tick all the boxes. Heavy debt, stock dilution, bad governance, connections to some shady characters. Marantz even says their CEO makes a ton of money even though their stock is doing terribly. And he's linked to people who have been convicted of fraud in the past. He calls it a potential bust out, where insiders are profiting while the company and the regular investors get screwed.
That's scary. And Rite Aid, the pharmacy chain, they just went bankrupt.
Rite Aid. Yeah, they filed for bankruptcy and appointed a new chief restructuring officer, a CRO. And guess what? He's got ties to private equity firms. WeWork, a Cena retail group. It's textbook. And to make things even more interesting, Carrie Teffner was involved too. She used to work at GameStop and Cena Retail Group. So you see that movement again, the same people popping up in different places.
Okay, so we've uncovered this huge web. What does it all mean? What are the implications of all this private equity influence?
Well, on a bigger scale, these sources talk about how much lobbying private equity firms do. KKR and Apollo have spent millions trying to influence laws and regulations. And then there's that revolving door thing, people going back and forth between finance and government. It's all very cozy. They even mention the Wharton Way, which is like this informal network that helps these guys make deals and connections.
And just to be clear, we're not here to push any agenda. We're just laying out the facts as we see them.
Absolutely. We're just trying to shed some light on these connections.
Okay, so wrapping things up, what's the big takeaway from all of this connect the dots stuff?
I think the biggest takeaway is how much influence private equity really has. It goes way beyond just the companies they own. It's this huge network of people and firms.
And it's up to you, the listener, to start connecting those dots yourself.
Right. Do your own research. Look at those relationships. See who's involved. It'll give you a much better understanding of what's really going on.
So think about it. What questions should you be asking about the companies you're invested in? Or even just the companies you hear about in the news? What does all this interconnectedness mean for the average investor? We highly recommend checking out Rantz's Connect the Dots series on YouTube. And keep digging.
It raises important questions about transparency, conflicts of interest, and whether these companies can really be successful in the long term when private equity is calling the shots.
We hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought, helped you become a little more informed, and maybe even sparked some aha moments. Thanks for joining us.